It's a well-known fact around my friends and family that I hate antique stores. They've given me the heebs and the jeebs for years, and I could never quite put my finger on the reason. It could be how claustrophobic they always seem to be, trinkets and furniture haphazardly strewed about the store. It could be that 99% of the things on display my grandpa already has in his big shed. Or maybe, just maybe, it could be the fact that these items most definitely came from the house of a dead person, and they've got their dead people juices all over them, and they're most definitely going to watch me while I'm asleep if I bring that taxidermied caiman head home with me. In my line of work, it's not unusual to run into a cursed or haunted object or two. Someone usually knows someone who has a cousin that once knew someone that touched an allegedly haunted mirror and had nightmares for 3 weeks. But not in a row. Hey there, I'm Megan, a freelance paranormal researcher and investigator of over 20 years, and welcome to Paranormal Potpourri, the show where we mix the ordinary with the extraordinary to uncover the strange, the mysterious, and the downright weird. So what exactly does a chair, a vase, two dolls, and a wine case have in common? They sound a lot like what I brought with me from my last semester of college, where they could all allegedly be some of the most cursed objects ever discovered in human history. Let's set the mood, shall we? This episode's scent profile is buttercream and clover. Let's take a deep breath and get into it. Curses come in all shapes and sizes. If you're a fan of sports, then you've probably heard about the Chicago Cubs and the cursed goat that made them miss the chance to go to the World Series for nearly half a century. Or the par 3 contest played before the Masters golf tournament, where no one has gone on to win the Masters after winning the par 3. The Superdome where the NFL team the New Orleans Saints play was built on a 19th century graveyard, and for the first 3 decades of the team's existence, were unable to win a single playoff game. The team invited a local priestess to come and complete a ritual on the field to help their chances, and they won the playoff game the following weekend. A common theme that runs through most stories of cursed objects is an unprovable or a hotly contested origin. No one can quite remember how they received said object, or the object has been around for so long the origin story has been butchered entirely. Another common thread is a curse being twofold. It not only affects the owner and holder of said object, it has the opportunity to interfere with the lives of those who interact with it. Now, there's no written rules on how to curse an object or what limits you can set. It seems almost as though intention is the integral part of a curse. Yeah, I'm going to be that person. And I'm going to bring the dictionary into this because it's defined as a solemn utterance intended to invoke a supernatural power to inflict harm or punishment onto someone or something. So I guess you really gotta mean it for a curse to work. Like, really let it sit on your soul before unleashing it into the world. Before we dive in, I just want to mention that this is a slim, and I mean slim, picking in the world of cursed and haunted objects. You'll have definitely heard of at least 3 of them, even if you aren't an aficionado of the paranormal scene. Some are just integral parts of popular culture. Others have been made famous for all of the wrong reasons. Nothing is more stereotypically British than a good old pub where the ale flows like water in a stream and the seats scattered about are worn down with age and from the many thousands of asses that have slid upon them. Regulars have their preferred spot saved by local barkeeps to keep unknowing patrons from ruining a good night. A pub in North Yorkshire, England, had one customer that decided to lay claim on one very particular chair. In 1702, a man by the name of Thomas Busby was led to the gallows, convicted of the murder of his father-in-law Daniel Audie via strangulation. On the way, Busby asked for a favor. Would it be so terrible to stop by his favorite pub to say goodbye to his favorite chair just one last time? As the hangman waited with what I'm guessing is the patience of a saint, Busby was given his last leisurely rest before his eternal one, and before exiting he loudly proclaimed, "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." Now, why all the hubbub around a hub at a pub? Well, you see, the thing is, Busby's motivation for strangling his father-in-law, Audie sat in Busby's chair earlier in the week following an argument the two had over Audie's daughter and Busby's wife Elizabeth. I mean, haven't we all gotten into a fight with family and thought, God, if I could just strangle the shit out of you right now, and then to go cool off, you just go and kick an empty can around the garage for a bit before going back inside to finish your paused episode of NCIS in total awkward silence? Just me? Or am I over-empathizing a bit too much with an 18th century murderer? Busby's chair, aptly renamed the Dead Man's Chair, became a local legend and a prime truth or dare option. Patrons would egg each other on to take a seat in the oak chair, seeing if they too would soon meet a swift demise. Throughout the 200 years since Busby's hanging, his oak chair has been the source of blame for several unexplainable deaths and tragedies in the surrounding area. All those who perished had interacted with his chair in some way. For example, in 1894, a chimney sweep sat in the chair for a short break and was found later that morning hanging from a pole beside the pub. 2 airmen from a local base in 1967 dared each other to sit in the chair and both died on impact when their car careened off the road and crashed into a tree. The 1970s saw 2 bricklayers taking a break, one deciding to sit in the dead man's chair. According to legend, the same bricklayer fell to his death from the roof of the building they were working on that same afternoon. In the 80s, a cleaning woman died from a brain tumor after accidentally bumping into the chair while mopping up one day. After a slew of tragic incidents, the pub owner would make the very smart and very wise decision to move Thomas Busby's seat to the basement. It was a nice gesture until a delivery driver popped a squat, returned to his daily duties, and, oddly enough, died after crashing his truck. The chair was eventually removed from the pub and donated to a local museum, where it was mounted 5 feet in the air to prevent anyone from trying to see if the curse was real or not. I guess they didn't take into account the upcoming trend of parkouring, now did they? While hanging in residence, museum employees started to hear more and more stories coming out involving the chair. One story alleged that an airman was picked up by a local driver from the neighboring base, and he asked the driver to stop by Busby's Stoop Pub for a drink. The driver waited for a while as the airman enjoyed his brew, choosing what looked like a very comfortable and definitely not cursed oak chair to bide his time in. The airman looked like he was enjoying his night for a bit longer than expected, so the driver resumed his route without his passenger. The airman, enraged that he had lost out on a ride for the evening, returned back to base, nicked a brick, and found where the driver was and beat him to death. As if we all haven't had this exact response to missing our Uber or Lyft pickup. Am I right? So relatable. Those who managed to evade the cold grasp of death after lounging in Busby's chair stated that they had experienced unusual activities such as extreme itching, paranoia, confusion, hearing things and seeing objects move on their own throughout the day, and weirdest of all, someone received warning messages written on their mirrors and walls. As of this episode, no other deaths or accidents have been attributed to Thomas Busby's cursed oaken chair. The only other chair I can think of that took out more than a dozen or so people in existence is the Iron Throne, and I'm still pissed about how Season 8 ended. Damn you, HBO! May God damn you straight to the deepest and darkest reaches of hell. We've all been to a wedding or two in our time. You get all fancy in an outfit you're never going to wear again. You sweat way more than you expect, laugh awkwardly with Great Aunt Mildred during dinner, and pray that the gift you bought off the Amazon registry won't be regifted next holiday season. Inevitably, you end the night with more beer on you than in you, and you spend the rest of the weekend on your couch recovering because you forgot that you're not as young as you used to be, champ. Back in the 15th century Italy, one wedding ended unexpectedly after the arrival of a traditional wedding gift. Historically, vases were given as wedding presents to Italian brides marrying into royalty or into greater wealth. One such bride was making her final preparations for her own nuptials in a village near Napoli, Italy, in the 15th century. A 4-pound plain silver vase was brought as a gift, though no one was quite sure who brought it. Hold on. I'm just going to scroll back up. I just want to double check that I read that right. That is, yep, a 4-pound vase? Holy shit! Well, nevertheless, pleased with this new bludgeoning device, the bride brought it up to her rooms for safekeeping during the festivities. Hours went by with no sign of the bride, so the groom went in search of her. He found her on the floor of her chambers, the vase in a vice-like grip in her hands as she took her final breath. A funeral was attended instead of a wedding, and the vase, renamed the Bassano vase, was given to the bride's family for safekeeping. Within days, the entire family of the bride was dead. The Bassano vase was passed around to other family members, all of them seemingly meeting their untimely demise shortly afterwards. Those close to the family believed the vase to be cursed, that someone purposely set out to destroy the bride's family. Those in possession of the Bassano were instructed to bury it in sacred ground, and it was lost to time for nearly 500 years. In 1988, a man unearthed an odd artifact. Inside a heavy silver vase was a handwritten note on brittle parchment stating, "Beware, this vase brings death." And in your very typical horror movie protagonist sort of move, the man crumples up the note and brings the vase to a local auction house, hoping for some serious cash. A local pharmacist buys the silver vase for 4 million lira, or about $2,000 US. 3 months later, the pharmacist dies, and his family sells the vase to a 37-year-old doctor who, shockingly, dies a few months later. As this seems to follow a specific pattern, a collector and archaeologist becomes intrigued by the Bassano and purchases it, obviously after his family pleads with him not to. Like the unfortunate souls before, 3 months after purchasing, of course, the collector dies from an unknown and mysterious infection. At the time of his death, his family opens a window and tosses the vase out of it, hitting a passing police officer square in the head. How there weren't 2 deaths on this day, I will never know. The cop picks it up and graciously offers to return it to the family, who profusely refuse it. I'm guessing seeing what they imagine is an extra from The Walking Dead outside their front door with a killer vase isn't exactly what they had on their bingo card for that day. The family warns the officer to get rid of the vase as soon as he can. This officer should have immediately gone and purchased a Mega Millions ticket. This dude was lucky to be alive after getting the equivalent of a big bottle of ketchup or a small bag of cat food bashed into his head from above. I'd like to thank you, Google, for your entirely and well-informed responses to my query of what are some things that also weigh 4 pounds. The officer, probably still unaware his prefrontal cortex was getting tan lines, brings the vase to local museums and is turned away. All were very well aware of the curse. Inspiration strikes, and the officer places the vase in a lead-lined box and buries it in a local cemetery. From there, well, the story ends. Smash cut, roll that beautiful bean footage. The end of this story is not as disappointing as not knowing how that officer is doing. I'm hoping he's well, especially with the huge dent in his head. That probably turns into a really lovely bird bath when it rains. Receiving a doll or a stuffed animal is like a rite of passage in childhood. Hell, I'm in my 30s and I got a Build-A-Bear Mothman doll wearing a KFC chicken bucket costume for Christmas this year. You drag your cloth or plastic friend around, setting up play dates with your other stuffed animals, and a shocking amount of half-naked Barbies. And eventually it gets added to the pile in the corner of your room or in a container in your basement. Some children claim that theirs have a personality or a quirk, and as adults, we laugh it off as childhood imagination and blissful ignorance of how inanimate objects work. Well, what happens when others start to notice those same quirks? The next two haunted objects have multiple eyewitness accounts to their truly disconcerting behaviors. In 1904, Robert Eugene Otto received a gift of a doll from the Steiff Company when his grandfather returned from a trip to Germany. Coming in at a whopping 40 inches tall, wearing an old sailor suit of Robert's, and clutching a little stuffed dog nicknamed Leo, this doll would become the cherished possession of who I'm going to refer to as Human Robert for this story, as Robert the doll was precious enough to inherit Human Robert's name. Robert the doll was an active participant in Human Robert's day-to-day. After a while, Human Robert's family started to notice some odd behavior among the two besties. Caught misbehaving, Human Robert would quickly place the blame onto Robert the doll, claiming, "Well, I didn't do it, Robert did," which is a totally cool, totally normal thing to do. His mother would hear Human Robert talking with Robert the doll in another room, and unnervingly a second, much deeper voice would respond back. If Robert the doll was around while others were talking, someone noted change in his facial expressions, either showing interest or distaste. Human Robert recalled one night when he was maybe 10, waking up from a nightmare to find Robert the doll standing at the end of his bed, when he vividly remembered placing him on the other side of the room. Like, how do you go about your day after something like that? "Well, how'd you sleep last night, Human Robert?" "Oh, fine. Robert the doll joined me in bed and whispered his dark machinations in my ear." "Oh, that just sounds lovely, dear. You want some more toast?" My years of training with watching Bruce Lee movies would have me crane kicking that little shit straight out a window. Robert the doll remained in Human Robert's childhood home when Human Robert went off to school in New York and to Paris to study art. Returning back years later, wife Anna in tow, it was about time these two finally met. Immediately upon meeting him, Anna was put off by Robert the doll and asked Human Robert to lock it away up in the attic. Human Robert obliged, and it was there that Robert the doll remained until 1994. That didn't stop the continuous claims of hearing footsteps and sounds of childlike giggling emanating from the attic room, though. Again, how do you function like that? After Human Robert's death in 1974, his home was purchased by another family who kept Robert in his safe room. There would be stories throughout the community, most from the passing school children, of Robert the doll following them from window to window in the attic, mocking them as they pointed out his movements. Robert the doll was donated and moved to Fort East Martello Museum in 1994, where he was put on display in a glass case. Soon after his arrival, staff would notice camera and electrical malfunctions in the section of the museum that he was in. Letters addressed to Robert from museum guests, blaming themselves for their disrespectful attitude and behavior, began to come in droves. Past visitors begged for his forgiveness, as bad luck and misfortune seemed to plague their every waking moment since. Museum staff now encouraged visitors to introduce themselves to Robert, to mind their manners, and to thank him for his time before leaving. The most stressed and emphasized rule at the museum: asking for permission before taking Robert's picture. This seems to be the golden ticket straight into Bad Time Town for most. Before I bring up the next spooky doll, I just want to quickly address something that's a bit of a new and really touchy subject in this field. Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens would be figureheads on the Mount Rushmore of paranormal investigators if there ever was one. I would adamantly be against it, based solely on the fact that most of their cases were just poorly disguised propaganda for the Catholic Church, and the Warrens heavily capitalized on the societal phenomenon of the Satanic Panic. Now, with that being said, I am not discrediting their work or their efforts to move this field into the scientific world. I am just stating, for the record, I think they were full of shit. Again, that is totally my own opinion, formulated based on what I've read and have heard from others in this field. Is the Conjuring movie one of the reasons I don't like hearing clapping at night? You bet your sweet ass it is. Do I have a weird fascination with Patrick Wilson because of his not discussed enough crossover into the Insidious world? Yup. Was Ryan Reynolds hotter than James Brolin in the Amityville horror reboot? I dare not say, lest I be attacked for being wrong. The Warrens and their investigations have a stranglehold on the horror movie market currently, and I can't say that I'm that mad about it. Will I go to my grave frothing and writhing about the creepy-ass doll they chose for Annabelle instead of her actually floppy-armed, red-yarned Raggedy Ann self? Yeah, meet me in the parking lot after work and we can have a friendly chat. Well, with that out of the way, real Annabelle resides in the Occult Museum of Ed and Lorraine Warren in Connecticut, contained in a glass and wooden box with a very friendly and not off-putting sign taped to the front that says, "Warning, positively do not open." Well, at least they're polite about it. Is it because she allegedly gives the best hugs and you'd be stuck in line waiting all day for one? Not really. It's most likely because of the demonic spirit that inhabits her poly-filled self. Given as a graduation gift to student nurse Donna in 1970, Annabelle would begin her reign of terror shortly afterwards. Donna and her roommate Angie would find Annabelle in different positions, legs and arms akimbo, or in entirely different rooms than they last remember her being in. Messages would appear on walls and on paper, all asking for help in a small child's handwriting. Specks of what appeared like blood could be found unnervingly on Annabelle's hands and chest. The woman contacted a spirit medium who conveniently connected immediately with the soul of Annabelle. She was a little girl that lived on the land prior to the apartment building that currently stood there, and her lifeless body was found in a nearby field. She felt safe in the apartment with Donna and Angie and wished to stay. They granted her permission, and that was when shit hit the fan. Activity seemed to increase tenfold, and Donna reached out to a priest who got her into contact with the Warrens. They arrived, a different priest in tow, and they determined the spirit not to be of a little girl, but a manipulative, inhuman spirit seeking to possess the doll. I've worked in retail before, and I'm just trying to imagine how one would even begin to process that return at the store. Hi, is the item damaged at all or not up to standard? No, just a demon inside of it. Oh, cash or store credit, I guess. The priest performed the rites of exorcism over the doll in the apartment. Ed Warren stashed Annabelle in the backseat of his car, and that pissed her the hell off. She allegedly manipulated the vehicle in an attempt to crash it. Can you say passenger princess much? I guess talk radio isn't for everyone. Sorry, Annabelle. When they arrived home, Annabelle would wander to different rooms of their house and was not a fan of any visiting clergymen. Having enough of her outbursts, the Warrens built her a case and placed her inside of it, where she has sat ever since. Before diving into the last of the haunted objects on my list, I thought it'd be best to at least try to tie up some loose strings. Oh, you thought everything was hunky-dory with these cursed items? No, my friends. One of the key aspects of paranormal research and investigating is debunking claims. There is usually a fairly reasonable explanation for mostly everything that seems a bit too spooky or a bit too weird. Going back to the death chair, a furniture historian was brought in by the museum to analyze the manufacturing of Busby's favorite seat. The historian noticed that the oak spindles were lathed by machine, not by hand, which would squarely place it in the 1800s and not the 1700s, when Busby was most notably alive and kickin'. And there were no historical documents to claim that Busby was ever married to Audie's daughter. But there was evidence of two criminals, coincidentally named Thomas Busby and Daniel Audie, that had been busted for forging coins. The penalty of forgery was a good old-fashioned hanging, and I guess also murdering your accomplice could land you feet first on the gallows trapdoor too. The cleaning woman and her fatal brain tumor could be purely coincidental, as most things tend to be nowadays. I just think her involvement adds to the creepy nature of the dead man's chair. The Bassano vase's final resting place has never been rediscovered. There are grainy photographs of what could be the vase, but those all vary in shape and size. There is another story involving the bride, though. This version states that the bride gasped her last words to her almost husband, that she had been murdered by a guest and she would seek vengeance on their very soul, thus transforming the vase in her hands into a vessel for justice, taking the lives of those who possessed it. Stories differ on who exactly gave Robert Otto his doll. Some claim it was a servant of Haitian descent that worked for human Robert's parents, and she was unhappy with the way her employers treated her and supposedly performed a ritual over the doll, giving it to the child as a birthday present. Does knowing any of this discredit the claims and evidence of paranormal activity around these objects, and really any other reported haunted object? I guess that's up to you. I like to think that it adds a very real, very human aspect to all of it. We all love a good one-up story, and a potentially boring story about a vase could maybe use a little bit of spice. Or the reason you can't sit in that chair is because it's broken and no one will listen to you, so you come up with an ominous warning that death awaits once your stupid ass gets up and out of it. Without knowing the true origin of these objects, their legacy and tales of woe and terror continue to evolve and penetrate the very fabric of our society, creating the basis for more and more wilder tales. Although, having the true origin story of an object isn't always what you'd expect. Please welcome to the stage, the Dybbuk box! Kevin Mannis purchased an antique wine box at an estate sale of a Holocaust survivor in 2003. The survivor, a 103-year-old woman, warned Mannis never to open it, as it reportedly contained a malicious spirit of Jewish origin known as a Dybbuk. Mannis would go on to experience a series of unexplained events after bringing the Dybbuk box into his home. He and his family would have recurring nightmares of the same spirit, an elderly woman with sunken-in eyes that they referred to as the Hag. Mysterious bruises would appear, and the noxious scent of ammonia would follow them around. As one would with an allegedly haunted object of unknown origin that seemed to plague their entire existence, Mannis gifted the box to his mother on Halloween. She promptly opened it, stating she could feel a cold breeze and the presence of pure evil go through her. According to Mannis, his mother immediately suffered a stroke and was rushed to the hospital. Mannis placed the Dybbuk box up for auction on eBay, again, as one does, and described his trials and tribulations in great detail. Jason Haxton thought, oh, what the hell, and purchased it. Haxton claimed to fall ill and have a string of bad luck once the box arrived at his home. He too made the incredibly well-informed decision to open the box and noted what was inside. A goblet, 2 locks of hair, pennies from the 1920s, a dried rosebud, a cast iron candlestick holder, and a granite statue with Hebrew words carved into it. He was later advised by a rabbi to place the box in a gold-lined container to negate the entity's power, so into a lead-lined ammunition box it went. Haxton stated that he had a sudden reversal of luck after burying it. Over the next few years, Haxton would go on to unearth the box and take it on TV appearances. Most notably, he sold it to an up-and-comer in the paranormal world, a Mr. Zach Bagans, to be displayed as a part of his haunted museum attraction in Las Vegas. A few movie franchises were formed around the alleged story of the Dybbuk, and out of the blue in 2015, a Facebook status from Kevin Mannis began making the rounds in the paranormal circles. It's October 24th, 2015. Mannis outlines his entire participation in the Grand Dybbuk box scheme as the inventor of the box's legend. He has his friends vouch that it is indeed their hair that was used in the locks found in the box, that he himself carved the Hebrew words into the statue. Okay, maybe his mom didn't open it, but she did see it on Halloween, and she totally did have a stroke around the same time. He goes on to say that the hullabaloo around this box is obnoxious, and writes my favorite taunt of all time. If you or anyone else can find any reference to a Dybbuk box anywhere in history prior to my eBay post, I'll pay you $100,000 and tattoo your name on my forehead. Ooh, eat all the shit, ghost of James Randi. This is way better than your stupid $1 million reward to prove that psychic powers exist. I also hate to be that person, but I do need to bring up the fact that Kevin Mannis misspells the name of his creation in his Facebook status. Continuity matters, Kevin. D-Y-B-B-U-K is correct. D-I-B-B-U-T is the name of a knockoff Pokemon your Meemaw got for you for your 9th birthday because she knows you're into those little guys. Zach Bagans will argue until the cows come home, even with Mannis himself, over the validity of the Dybbuk haunting. To see it in Las Vegas, you have to sign a stack of waivers promising not to sue Bagans for his collection of authentic Ed Hardy shirts if you have any unfortunate reactions. I mean, the man left Post Malone alone in the room with it, and Posty himself claimed to have bad luck for weeks afterwards. Posty! A trusted source of information. He's a celebrity. He would have no reason to lie or embellish anything that wasn't true. Would he? Now, shouldn't that all be a bit of a black mark on Zach's overall qualifications as a paranormal expert if he refutes the refuted claims of the original prankster? I'll let you be the judge on this one. Just kidding! It definitely needs to be talked about more. Let's just put a pin in that, shall we? However, a discussion could be had over the concept of how one goes about cursing an object. I advise you to take a gander at the work that Greg and Dana Newkirk have been doing in that exact space. Inspired by a failed Travel Channel live Halloween event, when a freshly purchased Dybbuk box was opened by the Ghost Brothers, and what looked like a single package of ramen flopped out, the Newkirks poses the question of, can you take a normal run-of-the-mill object and turn it spooky? Thus, the Haunted Ramen Project was born. They proposed to their museum members to acquire a bag of ramen that called to them and to follow a series of steps in a ritual, all devised by Dana to ensure their ramen could be a perfect receptacle for a potential spirit. The Newkirks, along with devising college cuisine-based experiments, also curate their own traveling paranormal museum of haunted objects and were quickly inundated with hundreds of allegedly haunted ramen packets. EVPs were recorded during communication sessions that seemed to capture disembodied voices of participants' ramen ghosts responding intelligently to questions. Ramen packets would mysteriously move around homes, and the weirdest of all, most would claim hearing the rustling of the noodles inside the plastic packaging when it was still and unmoving. Now, there is actual historic and scientific backing to the Newkirk's Ramen Project. In Ontario during the 1970s, a group of scientists and paranormal researchers brought together a group of 9 individuals to create a haunting out of thin air. The participants came up with the backstory and description of the spirit who would allegedly begin to haunt them. Their spirit was an Englishman named Philip. He was born in 1624, had fought in the English Civil War, and committed suicide at the age of 34 after being spurned by his girlfriend. Communication began with Philip, and soon enough, Philip was responding to their questions, and most startling to participants and observers alike, began to move objects like their table around the room. Sessions were videotaped, and you're able to watch them on YouTube. I highly recommend it. They are wild to watch. I want to emphasize something to you. Philip did not exist. He quite literally was an imaginary figure created by a group discussions. There is no historical record of Philip. Even the drawing they created was made up by them. But somehow, these people were interacting with Philip. Philip answered their questions truthfully and knew how to appropriately respond to situations and scenarios that were presented to him. Philip even brought up people from his lifetime that didn't exist either, but now somehow did. Could it all have been a group hallucination? A grand scheme to disillusion the general public? Maybe. Do I believe it? Yeah, kinda. The experiment was replicated with mild success in Australia in the 1980s, so the credibility is there. You have the ability to conjure a haunting out of thin air and interact with the spirit that you created with your imagination. Could most of the haunted and cursed items mentioned earlier be part of a larger conspiracy of hauntings? That they were all plucked randomly out of thin air and had a horrifically scary story associated with them? How do you disprove something like that? More importantly, how do you prove something like that? And even more importantly, how do I break the news to my own bag of haunted ramen, Mr. Rudy Stewart, that he might not be real? His love of planes and architecture is a staple in our conversations. It would crush his soul like, crushing a bag of ramen in your hands. Bringing up haunted objects to those in the paranormal world will show you a very divisive split. Either you believe it, or you don't. Do most of us have stories about interacting with an allegedly haunted object? Yeah. Is it a massive topic of debate in the community? Oh yeah. Would you find anyone with a paranormal background messing with a potentially haunted object? Hell no. I'd wager that most paranormal researchers, investigators, and enthusiasts have a very similar respect for superstitions and curses like many athletes do. You wouldn't catch many of us doing something that could ultimately lead to a spirit attachment or worse. But on the other hand, what one hell of a story would that be? Thanks for sticking around for this episode. More to come down the pipeline. If you like this and want to find out more about the paranormal world, please follow me at my page Already Here Investigates on Facebook and join the Paranormal Potpourri podcast group for updates and general tomfoolery. I'm Megan, and thanks for joining me in the simmer pot of Paranormal Potpourri. Smell you later. I'd like to thank Riverside FM for the amazing recording and editing service that I was able to use to create this episode. Thanks to the artists on Pixabay for their use of their music as my intro, outro, and segue selections. And a huge, heartfelt thanks to Hannah Neese for being an excellent sounding board and a world-class editor for this episode. Her knowledge and skill of writing is something I can never hold a candle to. I love you, you beautiful tropical fish.